Hey there, I'm Mark, in affiliation with Spectrum Pulse, and finally a somewhat normal week. Shame it really kind of sucks. And it's Billboard Breakdown.
I don't remember.
This is the sort of post-album bomb week that's actually somewhat manageable to work with. The majority of Sabrina Carpenter's songs actually stuck around, and there wasn't really much to fill in the gaps, and what did, well yeah, we'll get to it. What's also important to highlight is that, at least to Billboard, we only have about a month left of the Billboard year for 2024, thanks to their, frankly, asinine scheduling constraints, unless they do the smart thing and elongate this year to be at least somewhat representative of the calendar. Because otherwise, this Billboard year for all of 2024 would end in mid-October. Fun times. Anyway, our top 10, where, okay, I was completely wrong that there'd be a real challenger here. A bar song, Tipsy by Shaboozey, held the number 1. And I shouldn't even be surprised. It saw a boost on streaming, it's still dominant on sales, and while radio is falling back rather sharply, it still has the top spot there. Now, compared to the slight rebound for I Had Some Help by Post Malone featuring Morgan Wallen back up to number 2, where it also saw a sales and streaming revival, and as of now, it's not falling off quite as quickly on the radio, but it still lags across the board. It just could not make up any ground. Then we saw Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter hold her own, rising to number 3. Also losing radio and lagging on the streaming margin, but quite frankly, she's got enough of the margin plus sales to hold up, and that's over Please 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 at number 4, which saw its radio run start to slow down midway through this week. Now that takes us to Taste by Sabrina Carpenter, which slid down to number 5 despite dominance on streaming. Mostly because radio push isn't moving with any great volume yet. I can imagine it'll be coming soon, but hey, it did stay above Die With A Smile by Bruno Mars and Lady Gaga at number 6, which is racing up the radio and streaming, but really has a big margin it has to close to make inroads. Quite frankly, I thought it would have closed it faster. Then we got Birds of a Feather by Billie Eilish at number 7, where streaming is stable and radio keeps rising, just not quite as fast as Good Luck Babe by Chappell Roan at number 8. It's really only the streaming margin that is keeping Birds of a Feather in front. Then we got Lose Control by Teddy Swims actually gaining a slot to number 9, but feels entirely like a margins game. Just a slight edge on sales in the radio, which is on the decline, and that holds over Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar, falling to number 10, even despite its narrow streaming edge. But again, I told y'all, this one was going to fall off relatively quickly once the summer ended. Now that naturally takes us to our losers and dropouts, where, to be perfectly candid, the only two in the latter group that are somewhat worth mentioning are Hang Tight Honey by Lainey Wilson and American Nights by Zach Bryan, both falling well short of, well, anything. Hell, they might even come back. Normally, this would be where we would highlight a lot of album bomb losses, and while Sabrina Carpenter saw a couple, with Sharpest Tool at 42, Coincidence at 43, Slim Pickens at 50, Dumb and Poetic at 62, Don't Smile at 63, and Lie to Girls at 77, the fact that they've actually stuck to the charts at all, that is telling. But outside those, we got a couple remaining Post Malone losses, with Wrong Ones with Tim McGraw sliding to 92, and California Sober with Chris Stapleton slipping to 100, but the last loss here is It's Up by Drake, Young Thug, and 21 Savage at 74. Given the new Drake songs that arrived this week, the losses are at least interesting to say the least. Also somewhat ironic, we'll get to it. Now for our returns and gains. Normally you would expect to see a lot of rebounds post-album bomb, but given how Sabrina Carpenter stuck around, the only return we got was Parking Lot by Mustard and Travis Scott bouncing back to 98. But our gains appear a bit more diverse and actually kind of interesting. Starting off with Sailor Song by Gigi Perez, continuing to rise up to 68. Then we got a slew of country songs that are making some inroads. And while I'm not surprised that Chevrolet by Dustin Lynch and Jelly Roll is going up to 56, and You Look Like You Love Me by Ella Langley and Riley Green up to 41, I was a bit surprised to see 28 by Zach Bryan sticking around at 33. It basically sounds like a Jason Isbell song. The fact that it's now seeing traction, That's awesome. Now outside of them, we had some rap with TGIF from Glorilla up to 35 that balances out Help Me by Real Boston Richie up to 58, and then some pop that's honestly kind of scattered. Who by Jimin actually saw some good streaming to push it up to 28, and both Slow It Down by Benson Boone at 34 and The Door by Teddy Swims, they're crawling up for their next hit on the radio. It's going to be fascinating to see what actually sticks the landing. But you know what? It takes us to a pretty reasonably sized week of new arrivals, albeit not especially good ones. We're going to start off with number 99, Sorry Not Sorry by Lil Yachty and Veeze.
I killed with a bitch, he stupid. Niggas slide this way, just don't miss. Don't hit when we come back, shoot. Nigga talking about everybody know him. Nigga, everybody know you're a goof.
It's rare when I recognize the rapper breaking through on the Hot 100 for the first time, especially when they actually have underground hype, and thus it's more than a little frustrating that I'm not as thrilled by this as I wanna be. For those who don't know, Veeze is a rapper out of Detroit. He had a critically acclaimed project last year, Ganger. I didn't cover it, just wasn't really my thing. But when I see him alongside Lil Yachty, who appears to be in mid-crash out the past month or so, it strikes me as promising talent getting caught up in a mess that he probably doesn't deserve. All the more unfortunate that it feels more interesting than this song, where the title is a Beyonce reference and the rest of the track is drugs, flexing, and hedonism. And sure, Yachty's flow is still uneven, but a bit sharper up until he just abandons the rhyme scheme on the final verse on a song without a hook as he's angry at Bieber for some reason. And Veeze is competent behind the mic, but his nasal monotone just doesn't do much for me. As a rapper, he comes across as very flat, and comparing his brown Rolls Royce to a shit stain does not help matters. For what it's worth, I actually think the hazy piano inside the more elegant arrangement with touches of steel drums and fizzy percussion, it's got a lot of polish, the production's good, and for a song that barely runs over 2 minutes and again does not have a hook, it feels like a missed opportunity. They could have done more here. In other words, yeah, okay, decent, but definitely not a great introduction for Veeze to the mainstream. I just don't think this is that special. Number 94, Young Love and Saturday Nights by Chris Young.
Bad boys that their daddies don't like. Small towns that keep staying small. Here's the old trucks, Young Love and Saturday Nights.
Okay, I get that country tends to be late to the trends, especially Nashville country, but that also means they have the time and patience to identify the bad trends and skip over them, like the way too obvious sample choices in pop. Granted, seeing Chris Young try to cling on to relevance by doing something like this is not surprising, but if you're going to liberally sample the lead riff from the late David Bowie's Rebel Rebel, why did you just pair it with this stock bro country checklist song with some really synthetic blending of the backing vocals? It does not sound good. And look, I'm not against the big tribute to Reckless Young Love. It might even make sense for the sample to embrace something that is so nostalgic. But you know what? Chris Young used to be a consummate, sophisticated romantic earlier in his career. That's what broke him through. What happened to his lower register to add some gravitas to the song? This is just painfully flimsy, and he's not convincing, singing this sort of anthemic throwaway. If there is someone who desperately needs to return to mature material or just reinvent himself and everything else at this point, it's Chris Young, because this is not working, and it's not good. Number 91, Love You Again by Chase Matthew.
Let the candlelight shadows put on a show, talking sunset, sunrise tonight. I'm gonna love you like I'm never gonna love you again.
This is the segment of the episode where I find the next interchangeable white guy making Nashville country who is blowing up way late off an older song, so Chase Matthew. To his credit, the skinny guy with glasses, that's a bit of a different look, but he's on Warner Nashville. He put out a project in 2023 with this as the big single from late 2022. It's only charting now. And listening to it, okay, yeah, I get why this took so long, because it sounds like a painfully dated Sam Hunt riff with a drippy drum machine and synthetic backing vocals and minor key progression, and Matthew is not showing much charisma in the meantime. All of which contributes to a sex song that is criminally short on groove and sounds really sour, anchored in the line that he's gonna love this girl like he'll never love her again. Why does that sound like a threat? Because you're on the cusp of a breakup and you just cannot admit it? But then there are the lyrics that that are trying to sound sexy, but just come across hilariously awkward. He calls this girl Lights Out, and that could easily mean you'll look better with the lights off instead of being a knockout. But on the hook, he implies that her dress has him seeing red, even though it's a black dress, and that's normally code for anger. And on the second verse, he says, "You're the king size I want to be on." That's the bed, dude, not your girl. I guess if you want the least sexy, rough sex song that I've heard in the mainstream outside of mainstream rock radio, this might fill the bill, but yeah, otherwise I completely understand why this took a long ass time to cross over. Cause it sucks. Next. Number 84, Tailor Swif by A$AP Rocky.
Tell about the shit. Go to my tailor, got me dripped like hair. Go to my tailor, got me dripped up in a pit.
I mean, get it? Because A$AP Rocky is talking about fashion, and clearly not using cheap search engine optimization to ride the biggest pop star off right now. Okay, look, I get that Rocky's got an album coming, but this song was originally first performed 2 years ago at Rolling Loud, then it was cut from the album, now it's back on again, and honestly, I'm just not sure there's enough here to have justified it one way or the other. Yeah, Taylor Swift's name is used exactly as you would expect on the hook, and a weirdly muffled hook at that. The ad-libs are louder than Rocky is, but a lot of the song is just sex references that get increasingly questionable. The Malcolm and Eddie, Malcolm X reference on the hook doesn't even pretend to make sense. But then on that third verse, he then describes himself as violent and says he just fucked this feminist. I mean, that followed by the protest that of course he's not feminine because he likes fashion, it just screams of overcompensation amidst your usual stock flexing from him. And when you pair it with the hazy melody behind that brittle trap knock, the most I can really praise here is the generally bouncy flow, and quite frankly, it's not that special from him at this point. Look, I have to end all of this episode with discussing multiple new songs from Drake in 2024, but we don't have to bring back A$AP Rocky making mediocre trap just because he's on the side that won. Let's move on. Number 76, Crazy by SSERAFIM.
Act like an angel just like crazy.
Alright, look, I didn't have a great introduction to SSERAFIM on Billboard Breakdown last March, but given the mess that this week has been, I was all the more willing to give them a proper second chance here, and look, I don't know with this one. The chalky but deep squeak of the 2000s house groove, the metallic vocal filters, that ear-piercing squeal and chipmunk vocals that come on right before the hook, or how little chemistry any of these girls have with each other on this song about being crazy. I mean, presumably in love, given what's implied with that Pikachu reference on one's heart jumping like a thunderbolt, but that's mashed into your stock K-pop girl power song that barely feels coherent at all. And what's weird is that there are some idiosyncratic references, like to the trial of Galileo on this song. I'm not kidding, it's on the pre-chorus, where I think the heresy before the church is being confused with craziness, but then it's put alongside how they don't know how to discern anything with the who, what, where, when, why, or how, so they just go crazy in the meantime? Okay, I'm willing to accept this isn't even trying to make sense, it's just here for the vibes, but when the production and the hook find plenty of ways to just annoy me, I can't say this sticks the landing. It's not bad, in a club it'll probably work, I'm not gonna seek it out. Number 69, Circadian Rhythm by Drake.
Niggas don't speak my language. Niggas don't speak my language. Niggas don't speak my language. Yeah. How the fuck I'm still up?
Anyone else think that Drake felt intellectually insecure in the beef with Kendrick and after it? Maybe it was missing the obvious points of attack on Kendrick Lamar, or not following through on the lines he did open up in favor of widely debunked T, or his complete misinterpretation of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers on the Hard Part 6, or his extended crashing out all this past summer as he found new and spectacular ways to come back, including threats of a round 2 that I don't imagine will happen now that Kendrick is playing the Super Bowl. asshole. But anyway, circadian rhythms, that's actually a term I didn't recognize at first when I heard it on 616 in LA. What can I tell you? I dropped biology in high school, it happens. It has to do with how living organisms, both animals, plants, even fungi, react to the day-night cycle. In that song, Kendrick was referring to how his circadian rhythms were tied to a shooting star, a reference to being on a different celestial plane, but also the risk in tying one's celebrity to that falling star in the decaying industry. Drake, meanwhile, used the term to highlight how disrupted his sleep patterns are and how nobody gets his language in all of his references, with the song acting out as a sequel to his cut The Language from Nothing Was the Same, as he bemoans a troubled relationship, which is also standing in as a subliminal jab at Kendrick, where he highlights how he's really responsible for driving all of this success in Kendrick's direction and has dodged all of the destructive aftermath as Drake plots his revenge, and he, of course, is still up. Well, aside from the song continuing to fall off, let's be clear, Drake's trying and largely failing to rewrite the narrative. He's nowhere near as up as he once was, the summer proves it, but there are two things I like about the song. The first being that muted, melancholic melody that blends well into the chipmunk soul of the hook. It's reasonably catchy. I actually like the production here. Now, the second is the reference that of all the stuff he has taken from rap, he wants it out of his house. I mean, he calls it bad luck. Probably right, but it's the recognition of how many bridges he has burned in hip-hop, even if he's unaware of the full consequences of all that just yet, or even really understands it. Most importantly, it is Drake understanding how much he is disquieted and out of sync. That's valuable self-awareness if he's ever gonna try to come back, and this, you know what, it's okay. Don't mind it at all. I'll take it. And finally, number 60, No Face by Drake.
No face, 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 no face.
Meanwhile here, alright, I'm starting to get annoyed with the tentative and messy nature in which Drake is dropping songs these days and then taking them on and off of streaming, especially when this apparently had a Playboy Cardi feature that got yanked, and it certainly reflects the ad-libs he's doing throughout this buzzy, minimalist bass knock. Still don't like the production much here either. And this, again, it's Drake trying to be celebratory that he claims victory. He's identified all the folks who have now turned against him, who could never do it to his face, insert doubt here, but the rest of the flexes, they don't convince me. Drake claiming that they got the data wrong is hilarious. He can't fathom to losing on that commercial playing field to Kendrick Lamar because he has no cultural currency left. That feels very reminiscent of Nicki. And he put his therapist on leave, and I'd call that a big fucking mistake in this time. But the line that stood out the most was his producer 40 telling Drake just to be patient. Quite frankly, 40's right. Drake going quiet this summer to really show rappers how much they need him, that could have been a strategy that worked in the commercial field. But Drake didn't have the discipline to go away, so when I see all these talks about his enemies having emptied their clip against him, again, insert my doubt here, or all the plans that he has as he continues to stack up L's but really is gonna come back. No, Drake, I don't buy it. You're not as calculated. We can even predict your angles. If Circadian Rhythm gave me the tiniest glimpse of self-awareness for Drake, this just shows myopia and pushing away folks who are giving you good advice. Although, if you want to claim that you're faceless, perhaps bad symbolism when so much of your music has lacked personality or, I don't know, culture, you are by no means a butcher here. Remove yourself from this game for a bit, Drake. You need to process that you've lost. But that ends our week. Genuinely curious if anyone caught that last reference. It's an old one. But the best, my god, this week sucked. I do think Drake is going to just snag it though with Circadian Rhythm, where the worst is going to Love You Again by Chase Matthew. What a goddamn dud of a track. Next week, it might be pretty slow. I don't see the major disruption coming, but it might just be a reset as the album bombs fade. We will have to see. But until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Billboard Breakdown, affiliated with Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you next time.